right. So in 1931, German engineers began to work on several solutions to deliver high explosive or even poison tipped rockets against expected enemies throughout Europe. They obviously didn't know who it was going to be, but they did have the want and desire to obviously give back to the victors of the Great War. They wanted to complement their essentially traditional artillery barrages with rocket artillery as well. And even though every nation technically used rocket artillery, the Germans were by far and large the technological leaders in the field with these. These weapons proved obviously cheaper to mass produce, and their psychological effects were pretty much second to none. They did come with their risk, though, as smoke trails and the obvious sound emitted by them led to easy counter artillery and crews pretty much being discovered very easily. Hence the nicknames that they were given, Screaming Memes, um, as the sound that they did provide and give off when they were fired. They were pretty much used up until capitulation, with several variants of the Nebelwerfer being produced. And as we can see, they did come with um, obviously emplaced towed mounted versions and even half track variants as well. And generally, a typical battery included about 6 launchers with up to 3 groups per battalion. So, plenty of firepower that they absolutely put to work. These guys were generally pretty far behind the line, but obviously still came with the inherent risk of counter battery. And it was almost a necessity towards the end of the war to kind of highly saturate areas where Soviet infantry and more so Allied infantry were pushing to try to stop their advances, but definitely very cool weapons. And in the game here, we do have 5 different variants for the Germans. So we'll run through each of the variants where you can find them. And then afterwards, we'll also do a doctrinal breakdown of some typical doctrine buys that I would at least do in each doctrine if I were planning on taking a Nebelwerfer. I'll give you the doctrine points as well for each of those. And it is just obviously my consideration for what I would do. I'm sure there's other options out there. People, everyone's going to have different wants and different ways of playing their doctrines, but I'll just give you some tips and kind of the insight into what I would do as a competitive player. So we will jump on in here and get started. We'll jump into the first gun. Technically, there are no Nebelwerfer variants for early war, unfortunately. The first one we do come across is going to be available in the all-around doctrine for mid-war. It is the 15 centimeter Nebelwerfer 41. It costs 70 DP. Comes with a crew of 4, along with a truck when you do buy it in Tier 3. It fires 15 centimeter Nebelwerfer rockets, and it does have a capacity of 6 rounds. Its range in game is 310 kilometers, so it's a pretty far shooting launcher, given some of the other Nebelwerfers that we'll go through. These specific ones, the 15 centimeter 41 variant, they did enter service in 1941, hence the name, and they saw action pretty much throughout the war up until the end. Along with high explosives, the Germans also used gas and smoke rounds with this launcher, although both of those are not present in the game. For whatever reason, I don't know. That would be super cool to see. Um, and roughly about 5,283 launcher units were ultimately created. So, one of the probably more produced variants and models given the early war time period and when they started creating these, as early as 1931, we can see here with range, we're pretty much shooting, about nearly halfway across the map, more or less. And with this barrage, we will notice the 15 centimeter rockets. They're fairly large for maybe the high period, but this launcher is also available in late war and one of the other doctrines that we'll run through. And, once you kind of get to the late war tanks, it doesn't do as much damage, but, looking at these wood buildings, it's still a pretty good damage. lots of splash damage, and it will do quite a bit of pain to some of the mid-war tanks. So not a bad launcher to take if you are going to plan to utilize this one in mid-war. All right, so next up will be the 21 centimeter Nebelwerfer 42. This is found in a regular mid-war. This one is a 90 DP cost. Comes with a crew of 4 and with a truck. When you do buy it in tier 3, it fires obviously the 21 centimeter Nebelwerfer rockets, and instead of the 6-round tubes, it actually has 5 due to the larger warhead. So you will get 1 less when you do shoot it off. Its range is actually 320 kilometers, which is the furthest in the game for any of the Nebels. We did see it enter service in 1942, obviously, hence the name, and it saw action again pretty much through the end of the war. The 21 centimeter upgraded model was designed to obviously give the Army a larger caliber weapon for greater firepower, and up to 1,587 roughly launchers were delivered to the German Army. And as a fun fact that I did learn while researching this, the warhead, so the rocket, was actually found with the Luftwaffe and getting some use with them beginning as early as 1943 with a timed fuse fired from German fighters to help break up large bomber formations. So pretty cool. Definitely multi-use out of the rockets, which, obviously the Germans, a lot of nations had multi-use, purposes for a lot of things, but pretty cool that the Germans did look to use their rockets on their artillery. Not artillery, their planes. So we can see here, 319, 320 range does stop pretty much right there. With this one being a larger warhead, we will get some slightly bigger boost. Pool's going to do a little bit more damage opposite to those wood buildings, decimating them, and does do quite a bit of damage to stone buildings as well. So definitely a good buy for the irregular Doctrine, I would say, in mid-war. This is the only Doctrine that does include the 21 centimeter Nebel 42. So you can only really get it there. But definitely a very unique piece and very cool to see that get some action in the game. So now we are officially on to late war, and the first Doctrine that we will come across with a Nebelwerfer variant will be all around with the Stuka zu Fuß. This one comes in at a 110 DP buy for this one. It's a standard 251 half track with 6 mounted tubes/crates that were welded onto the side of the half track. And they're capable of firing the 28 centimeter Werferheim 40 rockets. But they could also fire 32 centimeter incendiary rounds in real life. Again, another thing that we don't have modeled in the game, unfortunately. The half track does come with a standard crew of 3. Whole armor on the half track obviously does vary, but it's about 8 to 14.5 thick. And it also has 2 MG42 mounts, one in the front, one in the back. The range on this bad boy is 250, which is actually the shortest in the game. And historically, these obviously first appeared in 1943 towards getting closer to the end of the war. And they saw action in very limited numbers through 1944 per most sources. So not too many of these guys out there, but if you want my opinion, this by far is probably one of my favorites to run, especially in the all-around Doctrine, which is already a super strong Doctrine for its other buys that we'll kind of go through. So you can see we've got about 250, just shy 250 range here. And with these 28 centimeter rockets, they are very large. At second largest caliber for the Nebelwerfers. They decimate pretty much everything in their path. And they'll do some serious damage to Soviet, American, British heavy tanks. Most of the time either decrewing or fully wiping them out. So definitely one of my favorite buys, and just such a cool model. Very cool to see this modeled in the game, and obviously it goes hand in hand with the German ingenuity. Whatever could fit a rocket could fit a rocket, and they did certainly try. So very, very cool. Definitely one of my favorites, probably in the game altogether. After that, we come to the defensive late war doctrine, which once again brings us back to the 15 centimeter Nebelwerfer, 41, yet again, and yet again for 70 DP. Nothing really changes. Still same range, same number of crew, comes with a truck, 310 range, 6 rounds. Defensive just gets it again. I don't really think there's any other variants that they could have included from my research. So we do get a reissued Nebel from mid-war to late war, but it is totally fine, in my opinion. Like I said earlier, this variant, the 15 centimeter, did see action pretty much up through the end of the war. So we do have that one again for defensive, and we will jump on ahead as I don't think a demonstration is needed yet again. And that will now bring us over to the 30 centimeter Nebelwerfer 42, which is available for the irregular late war doctrine. So this one is a total of 105 DP, has a crew of 4, comes with a truck, fires 30 centimeter Nebelwerfer rockets, and it has 6 rounds that it can fire off. Its range is 280, and with this one, it first came into service around 1943 and saw action in its role up until pretty much the end of the war as well, with about 950 units delivered altogether, although sources do slightly vary on that exact number, but I think the closest estimate is about 950. With this one, this is the largest caliber that we have in the game for the Nebelwerfer rockets. Obviously 2 centimeter bigger than the Stukazufus. This one will decimate. This is the one you take if you are filling a role of rocket artillery, or artillery in general, I would say. There's plenty of howitzers you can obviously take and use, but if you are going into the rocket artillery kind of path here, and you do have the regular doctrine, this is the one for you, I would say. There are other buys, obviously, in other doctrines, as we've kind of gone through here, that could be good, depending on what you want, what you're planning on doing. But I do think obviously this one sees pretty heavy action, especially in team games. So very, very cool. And that will bring us to our final variant, the Panzerwerfer 42. This is available in the all-around West doctrine for late war. It is a standard 251 half-track that was ultimately modified. This is costing 90 DP, I should say. Comes with a crew of 4. Full armor does vary, roughly about 6 to 12. Again, main armament is the 15 centimeter Panzerwerfer rockets. So again, a third doctrine that is firing off the smaller rocket barrages here. It has one additional top-mounted MG42, as we can see. This one fires off 10 rounds, so it does have the largest capacity ammo-wise in a barrage, and its max range is 310. This one historically came into service around 1942, just as a means of mobilizing the Nebelwerfer. They were somewhat of a direct copy to the Soviet mobile rocket trucks like the Katyusha. And this was obviously in a hope to help keep these highly vulnerable rocket batteries alive, and hopefully allowing them to fire and maneuver much quicker than some of these other variants, obviously, where you have to kind of set up and then hitch them to a truck, get out of Dodge after. By 1944, there were around some 300 built, and they would see action pretty much through the end of the war. So, very cool. I love the look of this model as well. I think this is probably my second favorite looking one, at least out of the variants. The towed ones are fine, but nothing beats a half track mounted one. Obviously, my only downside to this bad boy is firing the smaller rockets in late war. You're not going to do much damage to the heavier tanks unless you maybe get like a direct hit, a lucky shot off. But either way, still great for target area saturation. So if you're trying to clear a point full of infantry, or clear a defensive line or whatever you're trying to do, this will certainly get it done. And obviously, having 10 rounds compared to 6, definitely plays into your favor. So very, very cool. And with that, that will pretty much leave us off with our 5 different variants here that we have in game. And now that we've kind of gone through the background of each of the Nebelwerfer variants, I want to break down what could be some possible Doctrine buys that you guys see in a typical game if you were going to plan on taking a Nebelwerfer. Again, as I said earlier in the video, this is just what I would maybe do, or what I would typically go for in terms of Doctrine. It's also going to be circumstantial depending on the game and how things are kind of playing out. There are other things you can buy, better paths that you can take, but if you're ever curious as to what I might do, I'll give you a rundown and some insight. So for the mid-war all-around Doctrine, one that is not my strong suit. I don't play mid-war that often. I've played it a decent amount, but late war is for sure my preferred time period. Going with obviously a 70 DP cost Nebelwerfer here in tier 3. A typical path that I would probably take would be to start with the 4.7 Pack T here. Comes with a Kettengrad, pretty decent light AT gun. Does come with APC and HE, so kind of multi-role. Decent range, decent pen. It's going to do quite a bit of work against tier 1 tanks for the most part. And then leading into tier 2, I'll likely end up getting a Stug 3 F to deal with tier 2 medium and MP tank buys. Pack T comes at 20 DP. Stug 3 in tier 2 comes at 50. And then that will leave us with 70 left for the 15cm Nebel and the truck. So that's likely going to be one path that I would end up taking. Path 2 has quite a bit more variation to it, I'd say, and also very circumstantial. First possible buy in tier 1 may end up being the Panzer 35T if I need light armor to kind of counter other light armor. Very circumstantial. This thing's probably not going to do much damage to most tier 1 tanks maybe, but it is only 10 DP, this Panzer 35T, so can be a good harassing vehicle and or a light vehicle to take out other harassing vehicles. It also does come with some riflemen and MGs, MG guys as well, which is pretty cool. Looks like they actually do come with what are those? MG26s. I think they're Madsons in reality, but yeah, MG26s are the variant. From there, going into tier 2, it's likely one or the other. Either an artillery signaler in this Doctrine to help try to clear points, cause decaps if I need to, anything like that. Stug 3 Alsef, again, if I'm dealing with armor that I can't really afford to wait on. if I got to take it out, and if I'm not saving for any MP tanks, anything like that. Tier 3, obviously, into the Nebel. And the RD signaler, by the way, is 60 DP, as we saw there. 50 for the Stug into the 70-point Nebel. And then that does leave us with technically a little bit left over. Leave without Ken. So either do 2 of the P204s at any point throughout the game if needed. Again, very light armored. Only comes with AP. Not going to do much against some heavier vehicles, especially for the Soviets, but decent harassing Vic. Or into another Panzer 35T with a Sarah route. There is kind of a third path that you could end up taking, and it involves the Stug 33, which actually super cool Vic. We saw action in Stalingrad. A lot of them were intended to be for Stalingrad, I should say. Not all of them made it there, but quite a few did ultimately. Super just put the howitzer on it. But you could go that and the Nebelwerfer 41 for 140 DP. But I mean, you're banking until tier 3. You've got a bit to play around with, obviously in tier 1 and tier 2, but likely this is going to be your big spend, is 2 tier 3 DP buys, and I don't normally recommend it. Unless maybe it's a domination game, team game, maybe. I didn't kind of bank on your teammates kind of carrying the weight at varying points throughout tier 1, tier 2. But yeah, that's pretty much a typical Doctrine buy that I would probably do if I was going with a Nebelwerfer in all around mid-war. So definitely let me know if you guys think of any other paths or any differences that you think would be better for mid-war. Like I said, I'm not very fond of mid-war, I guess. I don't know much about it, so if there's better paths, I'm always open to hearing about it. But we will switch over to the irregular mid-war doctrine next. So with the irregular mid-war doctrine, once again, I have 2 paths that you'll likely see me take in my videos when I do take this doctrine. There are plenty of options, plenty of different paths you could likely go, and this one might give you even more variation to kind of split it up depending on what you need to do and what your plan is. But 2 of my typical paths, tier 1, I'm starting with the mountain snipers. They come with Guru 43 scopes, which are very cool, semi-auto sniper rifles. They tend to hit a little less than the Kar 98. You may not see them one shot all the time, but I'm going to take these 2 guys because they do come vet 5 right off the bat. They're only 5 DP, so 10 DP total likely spent on these guys throughout the game. And they're going to be very useful for clearing infantry on points and or trying to sneak guys behind the lines, things like that. Then it's a tier 2. I'll end up getting the 15 centimeter SIG 33. That does come with the SDKFZ 10 track. This is going to be very, very helpful for taking out tier 2 vehicles. Have to be a bit careful, obviously, due to its range being a little bit shorter. And you're likely going to put yourself in range of some VICs, things like that. But the SIG is very, very powerful, especially for clearing points. And then with that one being 60 DP, doesn't leave much room with what my plan would typically be. But then we'd go into, obviously, the 21 centimeter Nebel. And that does leave about 40 DP left over that I actually save for planes. I'm always saving for planes in mid-war with this doctrine normally, especially if I'm going with the Nebel. Can either do 1 BF 110 and then 1 BF 109 or 4 BF 109s or whatever combo you realistically need. So that's likely going to be my first path. Second path, a little bit more variation, but it's actually going to be the BT Panzer, Panzer 742 BT. Does come with a couple Alcar. And some of these guys actually have the MKB 42, which is a precursor to the STG. So I think these guys might be the only STG variants in mid-war, to my knowledge. So I'll end up getting that. Tier 2 is, again, into the SIG. I'm almost always getting the SIG regardless. And then Tier 3 into the Nebel. And again, still leaving about 40, give or take, DP with total costs. Considering the Panzer 472R is 15, and we're skimped out on one of the snipers, so can still get pretty much the same allocation of planes as needed here. And there are other paths, obviously, like the KV-1B is super unique, super cool. Could probably go with the Flame Panzer as well, but considering this video is primarily about Nebelwerfers, in the past I would use to go with the Nebelwerfer. We're kind of leaving those other Doctrine aspects out. Maybe I'll make other videos in the future about, different paths on these Doctrines if you guys like this. So that is the 21 centimeter Nebelwerfer and the irregular mid-war Doctrine. So we'll switch it on over to late war now. So with all around late war, 2 paths again, but not a lot of variation for the Stuka Zufus to be incorporated here. Path 1, and technically both paths will always start with the 5 centimeter Puma. Great speed, phenomenal tier 1 vehicle, might be one of the best in my opinion. The smoke launchers are a fantastic utility tool to get out of dodge quick, especially when needed. And the reverse speed on this thing is absolutely insane. The deviation typically happens with tier 2. It's either going to be a Jagdpanzer 4 to deal with heavier tier 2 armored vehicles if I need it, or it's going to be an artillery signaler to deal with infantry. So a lot of 1v1s playing battle zones. I'll end up going with the RD signaler over the Jagdpanzer 4 to try to play the long game and clear points. And then, yeah, with getting into tier 3, obviously it's going to end up being the Stuka Zufus, and the DP breakdown doesn't really leave you for much room. With the 5 centimeter being 30 DP, Jagdpanzer 4 and the RD signaler both being 60 DP, so you can really only get one or the other. And then obviously Stuka Zufus being 110 and the most expensive Nebelwerfer variant in the game. So that is pretty much what it comes down to for all around late war. It's not much variation with these DP buys, unless I really need to panic buy something. But usually if I'm going to roll with the Stuka Zufus, it's going to be these 4 purchases for the most part here. So our next Doctrine up is going to be the defensive Doctrine for late war with 70 DP unit cost for the Nebel. There's honestly quite a few different paths I guess you could take in terms of your DP buys here. Just as a note, I don't like defensive Doctrines all that much. I just hate them for the most part, other than maybe the US defensive Doctrine. I think most of them just aren't fun to play for various reasons. So if you guys have other recommendations than what I'm about to say, please, by all means, let me know in the comments. I'd love to test out some different things, especially with these Doctrines to try to make them work for me in the future. But typically a path for me, I'll start with the 7.5 centimeter Lug, or the Gebirgsjäger version of it, which is very funky looking. It does come with the Kettengrad, with technically 3 Gebirgsjäger on the back with Fausts, which is pretty cool. Then I'll typically go into a Jagdpanzer 4 early for 40 DP, or the 8.8 centimeter flak, or 6, depending on circumstances. This will obviously deal with heavier tier 2 vehicles that you could end up seeing on the field. However, flaks are so easy to kill by counter arty. They're almost not worth it as they are in game right now for their price. So typically it'll be a Jagdpanzer, and then if I'm getting the Nebel, it'll go into the Nebel at obviously the 70 DP. Still leaves you with room to play around, so you could probably get a couple Goliaths with the engineers, which are always useful. These guys are always fun. Haven't really been able to make a Goliath work all that often, but super cool to get that thing out, along with the Flak 37A as well, which is very, very handy with dealing with infantry and obviously vehicles along with the Flak. So probably other options and different things that you could likely do. I would say for the most part, the Lug and the Panzer IV early are likely going to be my normal buys or my 3 must buys in this Doctrine if I'm going to roll with it. But like I said, by all means, please let me know if you guys have different paths that you would take in this Doctrine for the DP buys, and maybe I'll try to get them going in a multiplayer game for us. So with the irregular late war Doctrine here, couple different paths you could take, a lot of variety as well. And I always, with the irregular Doctrines, leave a little bit extra for planes, just in the off chance a bomb is needed for whatever reason. Typically with Tier 1 for Path 1, I'll end up with the Panzer 1 Alpha F for 15 DP. Got dual MD-34s, which, as you can see, just shred on this thing. And it also has the armor of a Tiger. So, absolutely crazy. Hard to kill. Then with Tier 2, we'll end up rolling yet again with the 15 centimeter SIG for 60 DP. Not much variation. If this thing is in the Doctrine, I am likely to get it, even if I'm not taking a Nebel. And then for 105, second most in any of the Nebel variant Doctrines varieties for the Nebel, we've got the 30 centimeter Nebel 42 with the big rockets. So that is typically going to be Path 1 for me. Path 2, same kind of start with Panzer 1SF. Then we'll switch it up and actually go with the J, the Panzer 4J, to deal with any armor. Then into the 30 centimeter Nebel. So depending on the game, depending on if it's a 1v1 or bigger team games, if a specific role is needed, I'll either go with the J or take the SIG, depending on circumstances. And again, still leaving room for a couple bombs, maybe some Brandenburgers, maybe a second Panzer 1F, Panzer 3 Flam if needed. Not normal buys for probably the Flam or Brandenburger, although Brandenburger are super fun to use and that stealth bonus they have is phenomenal. But yeah, typical path right now is Panzer 1F into SIG, into the Nebel, or Panzer 1F into the J, into the Nebel. But there are other options as well. All right, and that does bring us to our final Doctrine. So this is the all-around West Doctrine with the Panzerwerfer 42 at 90 DP. Typical paths are 1 or 2, depending on circumstances. Whether it's a 1v1 or team game, you'll see different paths from me. This Doctrine is a favorite in 1v1s for me because of the half tracks and kind of the supplements you can do with it. I'm not always going with the Panzerwerfer, though, in a 1v1. And as I said in a couple of videos back, when I kind of showcased the Panzerwerfer 42, it is not my favorite in terms of actual value in-game. The Tiger 2 Alpha B is way better for what you'll get and what you kind of need in this Doctrine, depending on path. So this would be the typical go-to if I were to be running a Panzerwerfer 42, though. So path 1, we're going to start off in Tier 1, obviously, with the 251x17 off the 2 centimeters. Typically, you'll see anywhere between 2 to 3 of these in a game, especially because they do come with the Vet 5, Panzerlehr, Panzeraufklarer. So I'm supplementing a lot of my infantry buys with these guys and these 2 centimeters, which will shred a lot of low-tier vehicles. Tier 2, I'm usually going into the artillery signaler to help clear points. Tier 3, going to end up being a Panzerwerfer 42. And because we are banking our MP and supplementing infantry through these half-track call-ins, I usually end up getting the Panzer IV by 70 by for an MP tank, which has the Panther gun. So absolutely crazy. This thing one taps a lot of vehicles, which is phenomenal. Having that Panther gun. So Path 1 is very micro intensive with the half tracks. Not a lot of vehicles like counter armor until I've saved up enough for this MP tank. If I have to, because circumstances dictate it, the second path is the counter to MP vehicles and tanks, and that will just be switching out technically the RD signaler with the 251 by 22 with a 7.5 pack 40 on it, half track. So this will be my tier 2 counter, and then you might see some variety in terms of half tracks. Some of the other ones with like the Flam coming in, maybe the drilling. I love the drilling. I think the rate of fire on this thing is absolutely crazy. The sound on that is wicked cool, but I think the 2 centimeters with the Alplar just outweigh it in terms of infantry value that it comes with. So that is the breakdown for the Doctrines, typical buys that I would go for. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I did enjoy kind of doing a lot of the research. Bit different than obviously our standard multiplayer videos, but if you guys do want to see more guides in the future, feel free to let me know if there's something specifically you want me to kind of touch base on, like specific vehicles or specific paths in terms of vehicles. Let me know. I'm happy to do that. I know there's been some want for like multiplayer kind of hotkeys and tips and tricks, so I can go that route as well. But yeah, just let me know what you guys are interested in. Let me know what you guys think. Happy to do whatever. And I hope you guys enjoyed and have a wonderful weekend here.